Hi, my name is Glenn Turndra. About 9 years ago, during a particularly stressful time in my life, I decided to try yoga. At the time, I was very physically fit. I was biking, weightlifting, kayaking, but I heard about yoga's mental benefits, so I checked out a DVD, started to do yoga. It had such a big impact on me that I decided to go through the certification process and become a yoga instructor. I wanted to know what else the yogis knew. And it's been a fascinating journey, and I'm so motivated that I wanted to share with you some of the interesting things that I've learned in my yoga journey. In this particular video, we're going to look at pranayama, which you can do without a mat. You can do it anytime and has a huge impact. Before I get into the science of it, I'd like to share with you a little bit of the historical context in which the yoga developed. So come with me on the journey. It'll be worth it. So approximately 2,500 years ago, groups of individuals from the continent of India called Sramanas became disillusioned by their culture. And they came to the wilderness. They came to the wilderness where there's no distractions. The name Sramana in Sanskrit means striver, and they were striving for a living liberation. They basically wanted to write an owner's manual for the mind and the body. So out here in the wilderness where there's no distractions, they practice things like breath control, pranayama, ethical behavior, physical exercise, meditation, sensory restraint. And I think the Sramanas have a relevant message for us today. Today our minds are pulled outward by sensory distraction. And the message of the Sramanas is the yogic journey, which is to go inward, to simply learn how your mind works, to direct your mind. More dirt.
So I think a requirement for yoga certification should be that the trainees could be buried alive and survive. Why? Because if you fast forward from the Sramanas, who were the first ones to start manipulating the breath, pranayama, to the 1800s, the yogis were traveling around India doing these demonstrations where they would lower their heart rate and in some cases allow themselves to be buried alive and yet survive. It was so amazing that people thought they were supernatural, they were gods. But an Indian scientist, N.C. Paul, he wrote a treatise on yoga philosophy, and he thought there was a scientific explanation. So what he did was he had the yogis do their deep breathing, and he measured their CO2, and he noticed...
Cut! Let's take a break from the burial scene. Get a little audience participation. So when the yogis did the deep breathing and N.C. Paul monitored their blood gases, carbon dioxide and oxygen, what do you think they noticed? Well, counterintuitively, their oxygen levels didn't change much. And I can actually demonstrate this with this little device that shows the oxygen level in my finger. In his book, The Science of Yoga, William Broad points out that when we cut our breathing rate in half, in other words, we do slow yogic diaphragmatic breathing, our carbon dioxide levels actually double. But counterintuitively, that actually has a beneficial effect on us by dilating our blood vessels and creating what he would call heightened vigilance. But you don't have to take William Broad's word for it. You don't have to take my word for it. Let's see what the technology says. Inhale. 97%. Exhale. 98.
So he realized that these yogis had learned to manipulate their breath, and in doing so, they were lowering their metabolism, slowing their heart rate so that they could be buried alive. So rather than being gods, they were supermen. But why were they supermen? Because they had simply learned to manipulate their breath. And typically our breath is controlled by the autonomic nervous system. We breathe automatically. You can actually manipulate your breath cycle by deep breathing, and you can tap into the autonomic nervous system, and you can manipulate your heart rate. I'll actually alter my own heart rate, and you'll be able to see it through the deep breathing process, pranayama. Stay tuned.
So why were the yogis considered to be supermen or supernatural beings? Well, they could control their heart rate, and people found that amazing. They did demos where they were buried alive and they survived by slowing their heart rate and metabolism. Why was that unusual? Because heart rate's usually controlled by the autonomic system. It's controlled subconsciously, so people were blown away that they could do this. But in fact, they were simply using their breath. Before I show you the mechanism by which they were able to control their heart rate, just do a quick summary of the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is controlled subconsciously, usually, but we can control it, we can hack into it through the breath. All right, it consists of the sympathetic system, which causes the flight or fight response. Okay? The comedian Ellen DeGeneres is notorious for trying to get the flight or fight response elicited from her guests. Let's look at some examples. Flight or fight in action. These are dramatic examples of flight or fight in action, but scientists think that with all the stimuli we get every day, even that causes the sympathetic system to be ramped up. Practices like pranayama are really important for flipping the switch so we can relax. The other part of the autonomic nervous system which balances the sympathetic is the parasympathetic system, is what causes the rest or digest response. So these two systems are part of the autonomic, and through the breath we can learn to balance them. And I'm going to show you this as I alter my heart rate using breath control, Sanskrit pranayama. During my yoga certification process at Drishti Yoga in Mason, I was given a homework assignment to practice pranayama, breath control. That's the fourth limb of Ashtanga Yoga. And even though I'm a biology teacher, I was not aware of something called heart rate variability, which is one of the key indicators of your health. And so I strapped on my polar chest band and put on my polar watch, and I kept track of my pulse rate as I inhaled and exhaled with diaphragmatic breathing. And I was amazed at the results. And if you have a Fitbit or something where you can keep track of your own heart rate, try it. Watch what happens when you inhale, track your pulse, and then track your pulse as you exhale with deep breaths. So that means diaphragmatic breathing. I'm going to let my belly go out, let my chest rise, fully fill my lungs. I'm going to hold and then exhale. Compress those abs, squeeze every little bit of breath out, ab out. Let the chest rise. So these deep breaths, and watch what happens to your pulse rate. It's pretty cool. So here's Western breath, which is the shallow breath, maybe 15 times a minute. Watch what happens with my pulse rate. very little heart rate variability. Maybe changing 2 beats. So when I breathe shallowly, in a typical Western manner, there's not much heart rate variability. Now, to exercise my autonomic nervous system, I have to do the deep yogic breathing. So watch what happens now. Okay, so I'm going to let my belly go out. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. So now that you know what inhalation and exhalation does to your heart rate, let's see why it does that. And to quote Bill Nye here, I have a lung model of science. So this plastic tube represents your thoracic cavity. The 2 red balloons are your lungs. This represents the diaphragm. So yoga emphasizes diaphragmatic breathing, so the diaphragm comes down as your belly goes out, and as it does that, it decreases air pressure and fills up the lungs. The more exaggerated the diaphragm comes down, the more the lungs fill. When you inhale air and the diaphragm comes down and the lungs inhale, there's also a drop in pressure that causes the lungs, the arteries of the lungs to fill with blood. And when the lungs fill with blood, they take so much blood with them that it decreases the blood pressure outside the heart and lungs. And the body says, what is going on? So in response to the lowered blood pressure that occurs when you breathe in, the sympathetic system kicks in and raises heart rate. So it's raising heart rate because it's trying to compensate for the lack of blood pressure. When you exhale, the diaphragm comes up, pressure increases, your body says everything's okay, and then your heart rate falls. So on the inhalation, blood pressure drops, body says what's going on, sympathetic kicks in. When you exhale, pressure is restored, body says everything's okay, heart rate drops. So with each breath cycle, you're getting sympathetic, parasympathetic, sympathetic, parasympathetic. But if you do just shallow chest breathing, you can see when I do that, the lungs don't inflate much, and there's not much of a interaction between those 2 systems. But when you really work the systems with diaphragmatic breathing, what you're increasing is heart rate variability. You're teaching your autonomic nervous system to respond to stress and then relax. Stress, relax. So this is called the thoracic pump because it helps to pump blood around your body in addition to the heart. And it works the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems together. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk is a trauma expert and the author of The Body Keeps the Score. And he talks about deep breathing in his book, and he uses an interesting analogy. He says that when we inhale, it's like accelerating in a car. The sympathetic system kicks in, heart rate rises. Why? The blood pressure is dropped, the body's nervous, what's going on? And then, when we exhale, blood pressure comes back to normal, and when we exhale, it's like the brake. So, sympathetic system, accelerator. Parasympathetic system, brake. Together, the ability of the heart rate to rise and fall with each breath cycle is called heart rate variability, and it's one of the most important indicators of health. Dr. Vanderkolk was able to take women with severe PTSD who had very little heart rate variability. Why? They're always ramped up. They're always in the sympathetic system. And through yoga, he was able to increase their heart rate variability. So he was the first funded experiment to show that yoga increases heart rate variability, one of the most important indicators of health there is. So what's the practical application of pranayama, breath control? Well, before I started doing breath work, sometimes I would come home and I noticed my abdomen was really tight. Sometimes my stomach a little bit upset. That's where I carry stress in my body. Through yoga, I learned to detect that stress, and one of the ways that I detected it was my breaths would be shallow, and I noticed that my abdomen was tight, because as I started to do diaphragmatic breathing, where you let your abdomen out, it was really apparent that my abdomen was tight. So sometimes when I'm in my teaching mode, when I'm in my classroom, I notice that tightness, which tells me my breath is shallow. So I begin to do diaphragmatic breathing. I allow the abdomen to come out and loosen. Inhale, let my chest expand and rise. Exhale. So it's usually a 4 count in, 1 second hold, and a 5 count exhale. And if I do that long enough, sometimes it's at school, sometimes it's at home, I will notice my abdomen begins to relax, my stomach settles down. And so pranayama has had a huge impact on my workday. So that's the practical application of pranayama.